2 new devil fruits have just been revealed on Elbaf, one with the purpose of transforming your love into your demise, whilst the other seems almost deliberately engineered to combat Luffy's endless imagination. And we've also got a massive breakthrough with Loki, as well as lots of very subtle and I think underappreciated moments. This chapter was extremely solid if you know where to look, and right now I am looking at the Holy Knights, who are pretty perfect in this chapter. Seeing them around the dining table eating their gourmet meal was quite funny at first. That is until the horror of the situation set in, because this is a microcosm of the entire planet right now. You've got a small group of elites with access to anything they desire having a wonderful time, whilst everyone around them are dealing with a world that is impossibly stacked against them, fighting overwhelming nightmares that just seem to keep getting worse and worse. Eiichiro Oda is really good at making these subtle moments, the kind of stuff that maybe doesn't seem like such a big deal at the time. Oh, they're all eating, isn't that fun? But stuff that's a very solid building block for the bigger project. This is a big part of why One Piece works so well, because Oda never loses sight of the bigger picture, whereas some shonen authors do get a bit focused on micro week-to-week work, so much so that the larger macro story can end up feeling very undercooked. And there's also a small story to be told through the eating itself. Whenever food becomes a topic in One Piece, you should pay attention to it, because Oda often uses characters' relationship with food to tell us a story, which was most prominent on Wano because their main issue was starvation. But there's some interesting character work with Saint Summers and Gunko. When Saint Summers is eating, he has your classic arrogant, world noble expression, which I would describe as the face of entitlement. Like, yes, this food is good, and yes, I deserve it because of who I am. But when Gunko eats after the dream salt is conjured, her expression is extremely humble. Gunko's blushing, she's excited, and she feels privileged to be tasting this food, which is a very effective short story of status. It immediately tells you where Summers and Gunko stand in relation to one another, that Gunko is of a lower caste to Summers, and it endears readers a lot more to her and pushes us away from Summers, all by showing us facial expressions while they're eating. So it's small but brilliant visual storytelling. And it might be a bit early for this discussion, but I can't help but wonder if we're setting Gunko up for redemption, because let's be realistic here, we haven't seen her full face yet, but she is almost certainly your stereotypically beautiful One Piece Oda woman design, and in every arc from Dressrosa onwards, women with those designs tend to flip sides, and here is how Eiichiro Oda is setting us up for that, which first starts with setting you up for the 6th anniversary of Raid Shadow Legends, the AAA graphical most advancable endless content in your pocket and or on PC. Alright, I'll admit it, I do actually play Raid on PC, and I would like to put together a team consisting of epic hero Zargala, Supreme Galak, Mr. Monkey himself, Sun Wukong, and Alice the Wanderer. 4 of my absolute favorites are available for you by clicking my link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. Zargala will be gifted to you immediately as part of a birthday package worth $60. Galak and Sun Wukong are accessible through their promo code Supreme6 and Monkey King, with Alice the Wanderer gained by logging into Raid for 7 days before March 26. And just let me linger on this Supreme Galak for a second, because mate, I do not use the S word lightly, as he is a limited time void legendary, something that I wish Raid had been kind enough to give me when I started. Look, no hard feelings. Mostly because he's coming with a lot of great quality of life updates like background battles, which allow you to grind without the grinding. In addition to that, upgrading heroes to 6 stars has never been easier, and PC players like myself can now have multiple accounts. So please do click my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to immediately receive the epic Zargala, as well as Supreme Galak and Sun Wukong through their codes. And please, I am begging you, also get the limited edition Alice the Wanderer by logging in for 7 days between now and March 26. And once you've done all that, come find me under the name Grandline Guy and join my clan. Definitely do all of that. Very good. But for now, it's back to you, me. Gunko seems to be following a very standard, tried and tested Oda path. Characters initially presented to us as antagonistic all of a sudden have this pretty dark past, like they need to be liberated from their antagonism, usually wrapped in a very feminine and aesthetically appealing package. Think characters like Viola, Charlotte Pudding, Hiyori, Stussy. They are all examples of the villain to protagonist pipeline set up specifically to fit these aesthetic brands of women. And I am getting the feeling that Oda is keeping Gunko distinctly separate from the classic world noble traits. She doesn't even have the saint title, so she's not really one of them to begin with, and while she does believe in their superiority, she doesn't display many of these superior qualities herself. And Gunko is also the only holy knight who seems at all concerned by the presence of Luffy, whereas the others, especially Saint Summers, don't seem to believe that failure on Elbaf is even possible, which I imagine would also be the Shamrock thought process as well. Don't know about Saint Killingham, he seems a bit more meek and might have some concerns, but right now that's also what's separating Gunko in addition to all of the everything else I said. And her fear makes a lot of sense. Gunko has probably seen Luffy's bounty and noted his visual similarities to Nika, the thing that she is afraid of most in this world, so Gunko is probably taking Luffy a lot more seriously than almost any antagonist to have come before her. So something's gonna happen here, and it doesn't need to be Gunko switching sides. It might be something a bit more interesting and nuanced to do with a commentary on status, or I guess lack thereof. However, fictional pirate history does tell us that a pretty woman becomes a protagonist in every arc since Dressrosa. So that's currently what I'm betting on. Meanwhile, the opposite effect is happening with Saint Summers. I think that Oda's now doing quite a good job positioning him as a despicable antagonist, and I guess if Shamrock is gone, then that role does fall to him. Because Gunko is submissive by nature, she doesn't have the status to carry this group, and Saint Killingham feels a bit more dopey and obedient as well. So if Loki doesn't turn out to be the main antagonist of Elbaf, then it could end up being Saint Summers now. Although I still really want Shamrock back, because what Oda's done here, right, is you've gotten a match on fictional pirate Tinder and it's Shamrock. Wow, looks good. So you arrange the date, but the guy who actually shows up for the date is Saint Summers. And so you feel just a little bit deceived. But Summers' devil fruit is named in this chapter, and it is the Iba Iba no Mi, which is taken from the word Ibara, which is a broad term to refer to greenery with thorns. And you see this word everywhere in anime. For example, if you're a My Hero Academia fan, then you'll probably immediately recognize a girl named Ibara whose quirk allows her to grow super spiky vine things. Although the first thing that I thought of was Joseph Joestar, specifically part 3, because he's an old man with a thorny stand. The devil fruit itself might seem a bit underwhelming in comparison to Gunko killing him and even Shamrock's sword, but I really like it for two reasons. One, because it's nice to see an arguably mundane devil fruit power again. I know that as fans we often like to say that the strength of a devil fruit is only as powerful as the creativity of the user, but the end of Wano and beyond has made that a lot more difficult to argue, especially since the main character, who was the primary example of using that mundane power well, has now been upgraded to a literal god power. But this fruit, at least at the moment, seems to be all about how Summers applies it. And the second reason why I love that is because it is extremely thematically perfect. At the end of chapter 1142, we started to get the sense that Summers is going to have a character theme of twisted love. When he said that, to know love is to wound one another. And in retrospect, he was also summoned with Love Heart underwear on, which turns out isn't just for pure comedy, no. It's actually extremely surprisingly relevant to his character. And all of that gets amped up to quite the extreme in this chapter, where Summers does display that classic world noble cruelty that I've been expecting. Because you gotta remember, these guys, they're not like most antagonists. Accomplishing their mission isn't how they derive satisfaction from existence. It's all about how they can complete their task whilst inflicting as much mental and physical distress as possible. And Summers' chosen method is to exploit the concept of love. Something that I'm not entirely sure that world nobles feel. The only example I can think of off the top of my head is St. Charles' father being concerned and distraught when Charles got hit by Sai and Leo, but otherwise they don't really seem to express anything that even comes close to love. So the very idea of love might be a fascination to them, like observing equality in a different species, or at least it's a fascination for one of them. Because what Summers is trying to do is strike that perfect balance between love and suffering, and in this case through the parent-child relationship. Summers is creating a situation where parents become desperate enough to want to save their children that they try to touch them regardless of the pain that the thorns will inflict, which will eventually kill the parents who won't give up due to that profound love they hold for their children. And then afterwards, they're going to wake up the kids just in time to watch their parents die, thus exploiting and distressing the other side of that love. I have to say, it's pretty impressively sickening, especially the idea that they're deliberately slow marching the children through a road of maximum visibility and maximum danger to ensure that as many people are able to see them and have more than enough time to give their lives to try and stop them. Because I mean, what are the options here? You either sacrifice yourself trying to save the kids, or you give in to despair and you make a decision to let the kids die. Or if not death, then walk off to a fate even worse than death. And it's times like this that do make me question Oda's philosophy as an optimist. If you read One Piece, I think it's pretty hard to come away with a message other than hope. But POV, right? You are Eiichiro Oda. And in order to continue building that optimism, you have to come up with increasingly disturbing and convoluted ways to showcase pain and suffering. Oda probably spends quite a bit of time thinking of the most physically and mentally appalling situations that he can place his characters in. And then what he does is he plucks that thought from his imagination and inserts it into fictional reality, much like the ability of a certain Saint Killiam. His fruit is named as well. It's the Ryuryu no Mi Motokirin, which is the 7th devil fruit in the Ryuryu family, which usually consists of dinosaurs. So this is actually the first mythical Ryuryu, remembering that Kaido's devil fruit was a fish. And I'm not familiar enough with Kirins to know this, but I didn't think that dreams, dream manipulation, or dream conjuration was one of their abilities. And then again, Kirins can do pretty much almost anything, so why not? But I do know that this Kirin, this Killingham, has dream manifestation powers. The way it appears to work is that you need to be thinking of something, then be put to Kirin sleep, and Killingham can take that thought it is that you were thinking of from your dream and bring it into reality, as we see with the very fancy Salt in this chapter, which is a disgustingly powerful ability, as we've all experienced because our main protagonist has a very similar power to bring his dreams into reality now. Although in the case of the Salt, it is noted that tasty as it may be, any food taken from a dream doesn't grant any nutritional benefits, which is thematically appropriate because St. Killiam doesn't exactly exist to make dreams come true. In fact, he's part of an organization designed specifically to suppress them, so anything he can do will have that aspect of hollowness to it. In comparison to Luffy's dream/imagination abilities, which do have substance to them, because he is someone who exists to make dreams come true. Although in terms of substance, Killingham's fruit does remind me a fair bit of Streisand's Kuku, where he can turn anything he wants to into food that does provide nourishment, but does not taste good. Not good at all, which is very much the opposite of Killingham. Killingham's fruit makes food taste phenomenal, so it satisfies the very superficial needs of the world nobles, the only needs that they're particularly concerned with at all times, but it's ultimately, again, quite hollow. Still extremely useful though, and I'm both excited and terrified to see what St. Killingham can do going forward, because at the moment I don't see any reason why he can't use this ability on anyone, including Straw Hats, some of which have quite vivid nightmares. For example, let's say that Sanji is unfortunate enough to encounter Killingham. That would be real bad, because that boy has some deeply disturbing dark imagery in his past that could be manifested against him. And I'm not even talking about his time as a child of the German Kingdom. What I'm talking about are Hell's memories. If Sanji were to be subject to this ability, then what I imagine happening would be the manifestation of an army of Okama to chase him down. One, because it's funnier, and two, because I think we're pretty done with Sanji's childhood trauma. I feel like defeating Queen, who had all of the abilities of the German Kingdom, and who was a direct colleague of Judge, was Sanji symbolically dealing with all of that so that he can move on. Move on to his next greatest trauma, that is, which was of course him spending 2 whole years in the Kamabaka Kingdom. Sanji could even manifest Emporio Ivankov directly, which I think would be really fun, because Luffy would recognize Ivankov, and that is one of the reunions that I am still so keen to see all these years later, because Luffy still hasn't seen Ivankov since the Paramount War. But as for what Luffy's doing right now, meanwhile, in the underworld, we have some potentially maybe kinda good news, as Luffy has managed to one-punch man his way out of the immediate threat of Loki. And it's probably one of the weakest looking punches we've ever seen Luffy throw. The way I read it is that Luffy was performing a bluff attack, because we do see him gigantify his arm, although I don't think he gigantifies his bones. But we do see it get bigger as per normal with the attack, but the actual impact just shows Luffy with his regular noodle arm, which makes it look like he just gave Loki a light tap on the head. And what I'm thinking is similar to Usopp inflating the 10-ton hammer to make Perona believe that she was about to die, even though he wasn't going to physically harm her at all. So we make Loki believe that he's about to be hit with something real hard, and then we hold back because Luffy doesn't want to actually hurt him. Luffy wants to heal him. But Loki succumbs because he thinks that he's going to be hit with something much, much harder. But with Loki pacified for now, we are treated to a small Loki Haruden flashback, another brief and slightly more clear flash into the past, which we will likely inevitably get an extended series of chapters exploring, which could even be incoming next week. The way this chapter left off definitely lends itself into leaning into a full-on flashback, but something that I immediately noticed about Child Loki is the weapon he was wielding, because this is all pre-Ragnar, and Loki is instead carrying a very classic Kanabo, which is of course the trademark weapon of Mr. Sir Kaido, as well as spawn of Kaido Yamato. And I do have a video on this channel already exploring the idea that King Harold may have been the father of Kaido or related to Kaido in some way, because they do have strikingly identical facial features. And while this chapter confirms nothing, it is fascinating to see that Loki seems to have gone down the path of the Oni as well with his spiky club, which I have to imagine was a point of contention for King Harold, someone who removed his own horns in an effort to expel that ancient giant visage. Although something that I completely missed the first time I read this chapter is the fact that Harold still has his horns in the flashback. So this is before he felt strongly enough to remove them, meaning that it may even have been Loki who drove him to do it, because one of Harold's sons wholeheartedly embodies everything that he hated. Horns, Kanabo, the penchant for violence, everything. And I should emphasize that Loki wielding the Kanabo is more than likely visual language to signify how different he is compared to Haruden. You've got one giant child who is everything Harold was looking for visually and spiritually, but who was born from allegedly tainted blood, bad Haruden, bad. Whereas then you have the assumedly pure-blooded Loki, who represents everything that Harold was desperately trying to pivot away from. And this chapter also emphasizes that by showing us Loki without his helmet for the first time, which is a pretty big deal. Prior to this, we didn't even know if Loki actually had horns or if they were ornamental, like an image he was trying to construct. And there was even one pretty dark theory that Loki was wearing the horns that King Harold ripped off in some sort of rebellious act against his former father. But I really like seeing Loki without his helmet, because this could just be artistic wankery that I'm about to say, but seeing him without the helmet for the first time was quite exposing. Like, we are finally allowed to see the real Loki, which is also matched by his dialogue at the end of the chapter confronting Haruden about the truth behind their father's death, or at least the truth behind why Loki caused their father's death. And there is definitely a tragic story incoming, because as much as he's drawn as very scary, silhouette-y in the flashback, Harold did seem to both love and care for his children. And what happened with his family might tie into what St. Summers is doing right now, because we are really hammering in that theme that to love someone is to wound one another. So perhaps Loki killing Harold was his expression of love, and that there was a situation where this was the only true expression of love available. And also something that I'm not sure if we'll get to explore, but a curiosity that I have would be Luffy's thoughts on this brotherly dynamic between Haruden and Loki. I don't know if this is maybe a bit too deep for Luffy, but he does have this ability to pierce through all of the personal drama and really focus on the big basic picture. That big basic picture here being that Loki is Haruden's brother. And Luffy might encourage Haruden and even side with Loki because of his feelings towards his own brother Ace. But it's the idea that Luffy would want to heal this brotherly rift, because Luffy knows how hard it is to lose a brother. And it's not like Luffy is incapable of this, it's just unusual. Although there are a couple of moments in One Piece where Luffy becomes weirdly invested in the personal relationships of others. The example I usually come back to is Rebecca and Kyros on Dressrosa, because back then Luffy dropped everything to make sure that those two were able to reconnect and live the lives that they wanted to live together. And he could do the same here, because it looks like we are leading to that reunion, because in the flashback it was apparently King Harold's desire to see Haruden and Loki lead and support Elbaf together, which is still going to be a very tricky thing to pull off, because Loki does appear to have been quite a bit of a dick to little child Haruden. But then again, Ace was quite a prick to Luffy, at one point even suggesting that they kill him, so that wasn't the most healthy fraternal relationship growing up either. Although everything turned out mostly alright, I guess except for the death. We'll try and avoid that this time though, and if Haruden is willing, then we could be about to find out the tragic and sinister truth of Elbaf extremely soon. And thanks so much again to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. Definitely check them out through the link in the description.